Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pray, be seated. Honorable members, this House is now in session. We are continuing with motions, item F. And we have the early start so that we would get through what appears to be a full day. We begin our debate. Honorable Parliamentary Representative for St. Andrews South West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to you, sir, and all present. Mr. Speaker, I stand before this Honourable House to offer support to the 2020 estimates of revenue and expenditure as so proficiently presented by the Honourable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, under the theme Towards Vision 2035, empowering our communities, growing our economy, protecting our environment, and strengthening our institutions. Mr. Speaker, we couldn't ask for a better budget. This budget would kick off the economy for next year, Mr. Speaker. We just have to make sure that we implement this budget. Implementation will be the key word next year. Mr. Speaker, contrary to the belief of some persons, the agriculture sector will be featured prominently in the attainment of Vision 2035. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to express my gratitude to the Honourable Prime Minister for granting me the privilege to lead the sector, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it will be remiss of me if I didn't pause to recognize the Permanent Secretary and her team at the Ministry of Finance for their dedication towards the realization of the 2020 budget. I wish to commend and encourage them to continue on a path towards greater efficiency and sustained economic growth. Mr. Speaker, I present to this Honourable House my stewardship for the period under review and to project the plans and programs for the 2020 budget cycle. I wish for the record to place in context my presentation with this simple but profound quote from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Investment in agriculture are the best weapons against hunger and poverty, and they have made life better for millions of people. Mr. Speaker, this government commits itself to an improved agriculture sector through increased agricultural production and capacity to further its contribution to national economic growth, employment, and poverty alleviation. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in 2020 and throughout our period in government, the Ministry will advance its developmental agenda, thus bringing greater economic stability to this beautiful country of ours. Mr. Speaker, in the 2020 budget presentation highlighted a total injection into the agriculture sector of ECD $157.2 million. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, it must be understood that agriculture is cross-cutting, and it's for this precise reason that some of the allocations for certain programs and projects, example feeder roads and SIPE, are implemented in collaboration with other ministries. Mr. Speaker, according to Scripture, to whom much is given, much will be required. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister of Finance for listening to the farmers and other stakeholders' plea, thus providing support for an improved agriculture sector. However, as a ministry, Mr. Speaker, we must realize that much is required of us. Therefore, it is incumbent on us to provide the technical and administrative leadership required to propel a robust agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, agriculture, despite the many challenges, continues to be a pillar for sustainable economic growth for many, many individuals. Preliminary estimates, Mr. Speaker, show that agriculture's contribution to Grenada's gross domestic product will grow for the second consecutive year, moving from 5.6% in 2018 to 6% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, during my contribution to the 2019 budget debate, I presented to this Honorable House, and by extension, this beloved nation, that the Ministry of Agriculture would pursue in 2019 a program that would fit within the context of government's medium-term agenda, which enunciates the strategic development objectives for the period 2019-2021. I also highlighted the 12 priority areas on which the ministry would focus in 2019. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence as I point out the progress made by the ministry in collaboration with its partners on the 12 priority areas in 2019. One, Mr. Speaker, developing a pathway for succession planning, thus realigning our HR needs for more efficient delivery service. Mr. Speaker, the ministry have worked closely with DPA, the Department of Public Administration, to fill critical positions within the ministry. As a result, a total of 5 senior positions were filled. However, having recognized the depletion in the cadre of technical staff, the ministry continues to work with DPA to address these HR issues, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the ministry continues to find feasible pathways to build the capacity of its staff. Presently, the ministry is partnering with FAO and TAMCC to train 20 extension assistants at the level of an associate degree in extension services. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this would make a great difference in the extension services given to the farmers out there. In a similar manner, Mr. Speaker, the ministry is engaging the National Training Agency with a view to developing a training portfolio with a focus on competency-based training. This, Mr. Speaker, will allow for a pool of competent officers capable of providing the necessary support to farmers. 2, building stakeholders' capacity. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, the ministry built on a platform for information sharing and relationship building among stakeholders. And as such, through the Extension Division, Mr. Speaker, 350 farmers received training in technical areas, including production and management of soursop, root crops, and coconuts, and proper pesticides use, with much emphasis on citrus screening management. Mr. Speaker, in November 2018, the ministry launched and implemented a multidisciplinary approach to Extension Services. Through this initiative, Mr. Speaker, more than 50 visits were made, thus improving a variety of technical support during a single visit. Mr. Speaker, it is believed that this is the mechanism for improving extension services. And it's rolling out, Mr. Speaker. I have visited some of the farms with some technical people, and the questions, the things that the farmers want to know about, the technical people are right there to give them that kind of support. So that move, Mr. Speaker, that multidisciplinary approach to extension services would pay out in the years to come, Mr. Speaker. However, to improve its effectiveness, Mr. Speaker, in 2020, a comprehensive review will be conducted in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, the ministry continues to support our agro-processors through training and the provision of other technical support. 2 workshops were held in areas of dehydrating fruits, Mr. Speaker, given the growing demand of this product. We believe this is a viable area for employment opportunities for women and youth. And you heard the minister speak yesterday from St. Mark's, the MP from St. Mark's. She spoke about the women in her area who have had training. Either 15 or 20 of the women in her area did that training. In my area too, Mr. Speaker, St. Andrews Southwest, we have done a number of training with young people as well, and women, single-headed households, women who have children going to school, they have nothing to do when they stay back at home except to do their house chores, and so we have engaged these women, we have sent them for the training, and we are now setting up a center where they can, for the new year, go there and get their products together. Mr. Speaker, we believe this is a viable area for employment opportunities for women and youth, while at the same time addressing the wastage of our fruits and providing a healthy snack alternative, especially for our children. I think that we can take that to the schools. That is something we can take to the schools. They can have a healthy snack, so we have a market right there waiting for us. So we have to build on that project, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, 80 agro-processing sites were visited, where technical assistance was provided in the area of machinery, design, and production issues. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the ministry will embark on the development of a conceptual project framework for the development of a central agro-processing facility. Mr. Speaker, such facility has become necessary as we endeavor to improve the quality of processing and packaging to our agro products. And you heard the Minister for St. David's, the MP for St. David's. He said that next year, persons in the agro business won't be able to put their products in the shops without proper labeling. And this we have to work on, Mr. Speaker. So we believe moving in that direction, getting that central processing unit, it will help to shape the whole project so that our people would understand and they would know that they have to label their products, they have to identify their products on the shelves in the supermarkets. Traceability, Mr. Speaker, is a key word these days. You cannot send your products overseas without proper labeling, and so they have to trace where it comes from, what type of product, what it's been made of, etc. Mr. Speaker, developing the livestock subsector, small ruminants, poultry, pigs, and bees. Mr. Speaker, in June of 2019, the management of abattoirs was entrusted to the ministry. Since then, the ministry expends much effort in trying to hone the skills entrusted with the delay of the day-to-day operation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently, support was received from ICA through the Agriculture, Health and Food Safety System in conducting a thorough assessment of the equipment of the abattoir at Meribo and the training of staff on the proper use and maintenance of that equipment. Mr. Speaker, the state-of-the-art abattoir facility at Maribor will receive a significant boost in 2020 with the injection of a grant of USD $220,815, approximately $600,000 EC dollars, secured through the CARICOM Development Fund with the support of ICA. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity this morning to sincerely thank Dr. Arlington and our local representative, Dr. Derek Charles, for all the hard work they had put into identifying the funds. Mr. Speaker, as we continue to improve livestock management as well as food safety and meat handling on the island, the ministry collaborated with ICA to conduct 3 food safety trainings with butchers, thus improving their knowledge and skills in the handling of fresh meat products. Mr. Speaker, the development of the poultry subsector is critical if the ministry is to be true to its mandate of national food and nutrition security. Mr. Speaker, we know too well that poultry and poultry products are staple to the diets of every Grenadian and visitor alike. Therefore, it is prudent for us to work towards the reduction of imported poultry and poultry products. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, we witnessed a reduction of 2.5%, 300,000 pounds, in the importation of poultry and poultry products. Notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, we are encouraged by the quality of investment made in the sector in recent times. And given the number of poultry projects in the pipeline, I have visited 2 huge poultry projects that are coming on stream, Mr. Speaker. We are anticipating a significant reduction in our import bill in 2020. Mr. Speaker, these investments will see an increase of 80,000 birds every 6 to 8 weeks being introduced into the market by the end of the second quarter of 2020. Can you imagine what this can do for the economy? Mr. Speaker, this shows of investors' confidence in the poultry subsector, and that cannot be ignored. And it's for this precise reason, Mr. Speaker, we continue to work with all our stakeholders to develop the subsector. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce to this Honorable House that we will be in receipt of a visit from Dr. Desmond Ali, the President of the Caribbean Poultry Association, in early December, as we seek to advance this viable subsector. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry, in collaboration with the Ministry of Trade, has obtained a commitment for support from the European Development Fund for the development of a poultry strategic plan. The terms of reference have been developed with an anticipation of the development of the said plan during the first quarter of 2020. Mr. Speaker, only last month, the Grenada Association of Poultry Producers held a very successful annual general meeting. I was there, and I was impressed with the level of discussions they had at the meeting, Mr. Speaker. In this regard, I wish to challenge the newly elected executive to forge strategic alliances in advancing the cause of this viable subsector. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry provided support to resuscitate the Grenada Association of Beekeepers, which can now boast of a new executive to run the affairs of the association. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to report that the Beekeepers' Office, after being out of commission for some time, will be reopened in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, at the office, a directory will be kept with all the beekeepers, their names, their locations, and their status, the level at which they are in the beekeeping industry. Mr. Speaker, as we continue to provide support to the beekeepers during the period December 9 to 13, 3 FAO consultants will visit Grenada to engage several stakeholders in the honey value chain. Mr. Speaker, this, we believe, will be instrumental in advancing the development of the subsector. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the Association, in collaboration with the Ministry, will engage in a comprehensive education campaign on the industry involving some 60 schools. One of the highlights of the campaign is the introduction of a soursop honey product. What a combination, Mr. Speaker. 2 premium products under a single brand. We go in places. Mr. Speaker, the terms of reference was developed and the services of a consultant was procured for the development of a policy and action plan for the livestock subsector. This, Mr. Speaker, will incorporate the upgrade of a small ruminants facility at Laura Land, St. David's. Mr. Speaker, this work is expected to be completed in the first quarter of 2020. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry has embarked on a national inventory and tagging of livestock. Mr. Speaker, while we are experiencing a slight delay in the process due to the procurement of the tags, we are very optimistic that this process will complete during the first quarter of 2020. Mr. Speaker, the national inventory and tagging is critical to affording traceability in the livestock subsector. It will promote effective management of the breed stock and the reduction in animal theft. So this is so very important, Mr. Speaker. We have to ensure that this is done in the early part of 2020. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to report my ministry's efforts towards the strengthening of the livestock subsector on the Sister Isle. And I know the MP for Carriacou is happy about what is taking place in Carriacou, the collaboration that we have had with Carriacou and Grenada. Mr. Speaker, a team of 4 officers visited Carriacou and conducted an animal clinic there, where they examined and treated approximately 300 animals. Let it be assured that my ministry will continue to work closely with the Sister Isle in this regard. Expanding tree and root crop cultivation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the ministry is committed to increasing the acreage of economic crops, a thrust that is, in part is supported through the famous farm labor program, Mr. Speaker. I had famous say. Mr. Speaker, for the first time, a document has been developed to govern the implementation of this program, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the desired results were not achieved. It must be reiterated that farm labor is a labor subsidiary program to increase commercial production. This year, Mr. Speaker, the program saw a total of 80 farmers receiving labor support, 88 acres rehabilitated and or established, with 200 persons in the rural communities receiving short-term employment. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, The Farm Labor Program will receive an injection of $1 million under the program, increasing rural opportunities. However, Mr. Speaker, serious restructuring of the program is expected to address the pitfalls experienced this year. Mr. Speaker, on the establishment of new cultivations, approximately $300,000 is spent on labor and materials annually. Mr. Speaker, so far in 2019, approximately 54,000 plants have been propagated, which represents over 91% of this year's target and 34% increase over the same period in 2018. Mr. Speaker, that is a plus. I want to applaud the propagating units for work well done. Mr. Speaker, given the importance of soursop and its increasing share of Grenada's agriculture export, 20,000 soursop plants were produced in 2019, which more than doubled 2018's production. Mr. Speaker, as part of FAO's soursop value chain, 2 workshops in production and disease surveillance of 2 pests of interest were conducted. It is important to note, Mr. Speaker, that a soursop production manual is developed, which will serve as a guide in the production of Grenada's green gold. In 2019, Mr. Speaker, Grenada exported over 4.5 million pounds of this exotic fruit to the United States of America, with a value of around $13 million. And you know, we alone can export this fruit, so we have to take this soursop project seriously, Mr. Speaker. Our farmers have to come together to ensure that we keep the market for the soursop. We have been doing a lot of training, Mr. Speaker, with our farmers. We have been teaching them to plant, to prune, to take care of the soursop trees. And we want to ensure that they continue. They must follow the teachings that they have been receiving from the ministries so that we can ensure that we keep our market, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I went to Costa Rica recently, and I had the opportunity to chat with the Minister of Agriculture. We are doing a little chatting on the side. And you know what he said to me? Yolem, we have our eyes on soursop, you know. Well, I turned to him and said, you've got to be kidding. I said, we're preparing to keep the market, so I don't know how you're going to get through. So you see, when I went to Ecuador, the first thing I had was a glass of soursop. And the gentleman who handed me the soursop, I was speaking to him afterwards, he said, oh, that's such an exotic fruit. We want to get into the U.S. market. So we have to guard what we have, Mr. Speaker. We have to value it. That's one of the problems we have in Grenada here. We don't value what we have. We have so much. We have so much potential. We onto foreign things. We have the trees in our backyard. We don't even use it. We're waiting for somebody to come overseas and tell us what to do with it. Mr. Speaker, in the production and expansion of many root crops, 9 varieties of cassava, 6 sweet potatoes, tanias, yams, and eddos were cultivated. Mr. Speaker, ongoing work continues in exploring more efficient propagating methods and germplasm development and expansion, as well as training of farmers in efficient production techniques. I also want to recognize the work that the Chinese technical team have been doing, with our farmers, training our farmers. Mr. Speaker, the ministry prioritized the expansion of coconut cultivation and established 3 acres of new coconut cultivation. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that Grenada is included in the coconut industry development for the Caribbean Project Phase 2, which is being implemented by International Trade Center and CARDI, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this project will enhance the work of the ministry in growing the coconut subsector, which is generating sustainable livelihoods for many. And Mr. Speaker, just last week, I had the opportunity, the regional officer was here, Mr. Baxton from CARDI, and we had the opportunity to sit and discuss the way forward with CARDI as well as this project. Mr. Speaker, the ministry will embark on efforts to resuscitate the banana subsector in 2020. Presently, the ministry is putting structures in place, Mr. Speaker, for receiving tissue culture banana plants procured from Israel, which will be acclimatized at the Moran Propagation Facility. Mr. Speaker, we are very optimistic that during 2020, the ministry will develop a plan of action towards the production of tissue culture plants at the Moran facility. Mr. Speaker, it's time we resuscitate that facility and start to develop our tissue culture plants there. Pretty lastly, Mr. Speaker, well, I know when everybody hears this word, there is a frown on their faces, especially our farmers. And you know, most of the time, Mr. Speaker, it's our farmers that are stealing from our farmers. Just last week, I was speaking with a farmer in Grenville, and he said to me, you know who stole my sauersup? I get to know, my partner, So, I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, half of the time we think it's somebody else, but it could be our neighbor, and it could be our partners. Mr. Speaker, there has never been an engagement of any aspect of agriculture without the emergence of this issue. During the period, Mr. Speaker, under review, much effort was given to curbing this issue. And Mr. Speaker, while there is much work to be done, Mr. Speaker, the ministry is pleased having entered into a strategic partnership with the Ministry of National Security to commission a 24/7 hotline for Priti Alasne with the short code 300. This, Mr. Speaker, will be launched in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, noteworthy of mention is the following: the use of security innovation. And you know, a lot of our farmers are going into getting cameras for their farms. Just a few weeks ago, a farmer said to me, I held a thief. I said to him, what did you do? He said, if you know what I wanted to do to him, but I think twice because I'm in church. So it was good to know that he's in church and he thought twice what he was going to do to this farmer. So a lot of farmers are getting their cameras so that they can secure their produce. Amendment to the Priti Alasne Act, Mr. Speaker. A lot of work has been done with that, and I think we are ready. Early next year, we should be pushing through that bill in Parliament. Public sensitization and educational campaign. A lot of campaign have started over the years. We continue. We'll be having billboards and leaflets and a number of other public education in the new year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the injection of an added $200,000, the ministry is confident these initiatives will aid in bringing some relief to the hard-working farmers of this nation. Investment in agriculture. Mr. Speaker, as we make investments in feeder roads development, farm road support, and input support, in an effort to increase production, Mr. Speaker, we must also push agriculture competitiveness. With the implementation of the OECS Regional Agriculture Competitiveness Project, Mr. Speaker, AgriCom, this government will support a minimum of 10 private sector investments in the sector. Government will provide financing of $3.8 million through matching grants towards the execution of these investments. Mr. Speaker, an additional $500,000 will be expended for capacity building of the extension services through training and equipment. KANECO, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the KANECO project continues to provide opportunities for rural development and employment. The project is now employing 120 workers across the island, with an additional 25 seasonal workers. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that this project will impact significantly to Grenada's socioeconomic development. And you heard the MP for the area speak about KANECO coming to her constituency and how much has been done. The whole landscape of that constituency has shifted to further development, Mr. Speaker. And I had the opportunity to visit KANECO recently, and I was so impressed with the level of infrastructure and development that has taken place in that area. And not only that, I was so impressed to see all the little young men who were on the side of the road looking their phones, the little mechanics. They were all employed at that facility in Meadows. And they were there like they were in charge. I saw that, and that is a plus. Sometimes we see these young men on the side of the road and, they're just hanging out, and we tend to not even, look twice at them. I know every morning I'm coming down, and these guys on the side of the road will call out to me, "Oh, Minister, you ain't giving me work." Audience, supporting us and that kind of thing. But when I pull them together, when I called them in a meeting, and we started to work with them, I saw so much difference in them. So we have to give them a chance. And KANECO is giving these young men an opportunity to utilize the little skills that they have that can develop. I also was very pleased with the chief young man who was doing the fermentary part of it. He's from Telescope, and I was so impressed with his level of expertise and his strength of character, the way he he went around. I think he was trained in Cuba, and he's the chemical engineer there. I believe he was trained in that area. Very impressive. He did a very good presentation. So we have the skills. We have these young people out there that we have to embrace. And I know the Ministry of Youth is doing a lot of work in terms of embracing and shaping the lives of our young people. Mr. Speaker, Grenada Pest and Disease Management, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Grenada continues to work with the USDA with regards to market access for its mangoes into the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, the pest risk analysis has been completed by the U.S. authorities. The next stage, Mr. Speaker, involves the development of risk mitigating measures. Once clearance is given to resume that export, Mr. Speaker, this will impact small farmers significantly, as they would now be able to increase their livelihoods. Mr. Speaker, we are looking forward to the day when this will happen, because a lot of our mangoes are spoiling, and as much as we're trying to get our people into the small business development programs, we're drying their fruits and other things, we still have to look at the export market because of the quantities of mangoes that we have spoiling in the island. Mr. Speaker, on 1st July, the planned quarantine license module for the Asacuda World Training Platform was implemented. This development means that all applications for permits to import plants, planting material, and plant products are done online using Asacuda, which is maintained by the Custom and Excise Division. Mr. Speaker, at the end of October this year, 967 permit applications were processed. Mainstreaming climate-smart agriculture. Mr. Speaker, Regarding the SIRE project, Climate Smart Agriculture and Rural Enterprise Project. Mr. Speaker, all the necessary machinery and mechanisms, including human resources, MOUs, identification of potential beneficiaries, initial training activities have been put in place to ensure a successful implementation of this project in 2020, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, along with the injection of over $100 million expended on feeder roads, SIEP will be focusing on several roads in 2020, some of which have already been identified. Develop and pilot an agricultural risk insurance product for nutmeg and cocoa production. Mr. Speaker, government is cognizant of the vulnerabilities of farmers to climate change and the related increased frequency and severity of natural hazards. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, government has partnered with FAO to develop a pilot on agricultural risk insurance product for Grenada. Crop insurance coverage is identified as a priority for the sector within the National Agriculture Plan 2015 to 2030. Mr. Speaker, a hybrid insurance product which combines an index and indemnity cover has been designed for the nutmeg and cocoa subsectors. The pilot program will ensure these subsectors against severe wind damage in the first instance. Additional crops, Mr. Speaker, and other perils such as excessive rainfall and drought will be considered over time. Mr. Speaker, the pilot of this initiative is scheduled for the 2020 hurricane season. The value of this project is EC $376,000. Strengthening public relations. Mr. Speaker, over the years, the ministry has been ineffective in reporting to its stakeholders, promoting its activities, and highlighting its achievements. This year, Mr. Speaker, the ministry began remedying the situation by establishing its PR unit. The unit is staffed with 3 efficient persons who have been doing an excellent job. And I'm sure they are here, I hope they are here this morning, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend these young people. They're so energetic, they're full of creativity, and they've been up and down in the highways and byways with all the farmers. They're on Facebook, they're on everything. And that is the kind of PR the Ministry of Agriculture needs, because the Ministry of Agriculture has so many programs and projects that are taking place. At the same time, we need that kind of energy in the PR. So we are happy to have these young people, and I want to applaud their efforts. Mr. Speaker, also permit me to applaud the efforts of the Grenada Informer newspaper, Mr. Speaker, for their partnership in publishing a weekly agriculture feature where farmers, in particularly youths, are being profiled. Improving data collection and usage, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many often wonder if the agriculture sector contribution to GDP, as reported, is a true reflection of this sector to the economy. We often wonder that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the ministry is aware of its inefficiency in data collection, thus impacting its contribution to the gross domestic product. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, with the assistance of the FAO, the ministry has begun the implementation of a project dedicated to strengthening data collection and usage. To date, Mr. Speaker, the project has conducted a needs assessment to ascertain the weaknesses in the system and recommend solutions to address same. Mr. Speaker, in the first quarter of 2020, the project will put these recommendations into effect. The ministry is also working closely with the Central Statistical Office to better coordinate and capture the usage of agriculture data. And Mr. Speaker, you know, we always say that there's not much youth in agriculture. That's a joke, you know. We don't have the data. That's the problem. Because when I visit the communities, when I visit the farmers, most of them are young people. Those that are aging there in the background, some of them, the young people are moving forward, but we don't have the information. So moving forward, with this support, Mr. Speaker, and the training that our extension officers have received, we will see, you know, more data collection in 2020. Mr. Speaker, the Maribor Propagating Station is well on its way to becoming a climate change resilience facility. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, there have been improvements in the drainage network at the facility, where 1,400 feet and approximately 900 feet of storm drains were constructed and rehabilitated respectively. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the construction of these drains brought much relief to the residents of SAB, who have been the subject of much flooding over the years. And I'm sure the MP in that area will be happy about that. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the installation of 3 water tanks with a collective capacity of 33,000 gallons have improved the water storage capacity at the facility through the process of rainwater harvesting. Mr. Speaker, it is a sense of relief that I am pleased to inform this Honorable House that 2 fully automated shade houses were erected at this facility. These shade houses will be used as part of a new initiative to resume the propagating of citrus plants under very controlled environment to ensure the propagation of disease-free planting materials. Mr. Speaker, the incidence of citrus greening disease has forced the ministry to develop a special protocol for the propagation of citrus plants. Currently, Mr. Speaker, citrus plants are not propagated. However, preparations are ongoing to commence propagation in 2020. Climate Resilience Agriculture for Integrated Landscape Management Project. Mr. Speaker, this project was approved in 2019 and will be funded with a GEF grant of US $3.7 million. That's $10 million EC. From Grenada, GEF 6-star allocation under the UNDP as implementing agent. Mr. Speaker, the objective of this project is to operationalize integrated agro-ecosystem management in the agriculture sector through mainstreaming biodiversity conservation in the production landscape and increasing resilience of agriculture systems. Implementation, Mr. Speaker, has started with procurement of key project personnel. Mr. Speaker, the Land Bank project. You see, Mr. Speaker, agriculture needs 2 hours, but I'm fighting to see how it can fit. And I've slimmed down my document in so many ways. Mr. Speaker, and I hope you're checking the time that I've lost. Mr. Speaker, the FAO Land Bank project during 2019 has met many project milestones, including 1, training in software and procedural matters related to the land bank. 2, development of draft lease agreements. 3, conduct meetings with potential beneficiaries. 4, development of procedural manual which provides guidance to the land bank administrators. 5, procurement of hardware. And 6, development of communication strategy for the land bank initiative. Mr. Speaker, the pilot land bank sites located in Grand Bacolet and Diamond Estate will be surveyed soon, and thereafter the selection of beneficiaries will be done. Mr. Speaker, the ministry remains very optimistic that the goals of the project will be realized, thus developing a model, improving access to land resources, especially for our youth. The Soil Fertility and Mapping Project, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as part of the ongoing implementation of the Soil Fertility and Mapping Project, the project is now developing the soil fertility maps in Morocco of the entire island. This, Mr. Speaker, will enable landowners, farmers, and investors to use the information as a management tool in determining the best crops to grow in specific watersheds, areas in Grenada, based on the fertility of the soils. So, Mr. Speaker, our farmers would have something in their hand to guide them, so they would know the best areas, what are the crops that they could grow in those fertile areas. They would know how much fertilizer to add to their soils, or if they have to add any at all. So this is a great guide for our farmers, and they should really take advantage of that. Mr. Speaker, it is important to highlight that under this project, training was also provided to officers, as well as the supply of 4 consignments of fertilizer, totaling about 15,000 bags, each containing 110 pounds. And this was donated to Grenada, with the last batch received a few weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, the fertilizer brings welcome relief to farmers, which is now sold at a highly subsidized price. Mr. Speaker, the ministry wishes to express gratitude to the Kingdom of Morocco for the support received under this very important project. Granting of concessions. Mr. Speaker, and often you hear the many complaints about the ministry is not supporting the nation's farmers and agro-processors. We hear that all the time. Sometimes I ask myself, Mr. Speaker, are these allegations, are there a lack of awareness? Mr. Speaker, each year the state has forgone thousands of dollars in concessions to farmers and agro-processors. In 2019, 21 concessions on vehicles were granted to farmers with a total value of around $600,000. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, 49 concessions were granted to farmers and other agribusinesses on agricultural inputs with a total value about $700,000 and $50,000. So essentially, Mr. Speaker, in 2019, $1.35 million in concessions was granted to stakeholders involved in the agriculture sector. Tractor service, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that the farm mechanization unit at Maribor was not very efficient in providing tractor service to the farmers, which resulted in most farmers, Mr. Speaker, procuring the service privately. Mr. Speaker, the farmers deserve better, and I believe if the ministry cannot provide the service readily to the farmers, then it must create its enabling environment for them to access the service. And this is what we have been doing, Mr. Speaker. We now have a number of persons who are bringing in tractors, and they're farmers, They understand the need for the service, so they are privately bringing in their tractors so they can offer the service to the farmers throughout Grenada. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, the ministry has made the decision in 2019, which was endorsed by Cabinet, to privatize the tractor service with the aim of improving services provided to farmers. Considering the foregoing, Mr. Speaker, in number, and I said it before, in number of private operators have invested in the purchase of tractors and plows and have been providing land preparation services to our farmers throughout Grenada. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Agriculture is committed to work very closely with these private sector stakeholders to ensure that the farmers' interest is well reserved. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have had several meetings with the persons who are providing the service, and we are very pleased with what we have seen and learned during those meetings. Youth in Agriculture, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this initiative has been through a thorough review, which have since seen the conceptual framework be presented a selected cohort of the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, while endorsing the conceptual framework, the members wanted to be convinced that the initiative is transformative and such instructed that the framework be fleshed out to include components like a microfinancing mechanism, a recruitment and selection framework, implementation plan, and monitoring and evaluation framework. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry has since procured the services of a consultant who will provide a working document that will see the commencement of the implementation of the first quarter of 2020. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. How much time?
You have 5 minutes of regular time, and you have 15 minutes that I've given.
Thank you very much.
Promised yesterday.
Okay. Lands and Survey. Mr. Speaker, during 2019, the Lands and Survey Department made efforts to improve its revenue collection. To date, the department has witnessed a 14.86% increase in revenue collection when compared to the same period of 2018. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to report that a concerted effort is made towards the regularization of long outstanding land matters. And I know my colleagues will be very happy about that because they have been on my back to get these lands regularized in the different constituencies. Mr. Speaker, I think as I speak now, we have surveyors in the field conducting surveys. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry's agenda for 2020 will fit within the context of government's medium-term agenda, 2019-2021, which is tied to the National Agriculture Plan 2015 to 2030 and the National Strategic Development Plan 2020 to 2035. Mr. Speaker, I cannot go into the plan because it will be made a national document, so persons will have the opportunity. If I go into speaking of that, I will be here till the next day, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to, as I close, I wish to make a clarion call to our farmers out there, Mr. Speaker, to guard their investment. It's their bread and butter. And a lot of the times they depend on the ministry to guard their investment for them. We are there to facilitate. We are there to support them. We are there to make the policy decisions, working closely with them. We are there to offer them extension services, the expertise of our trained officers. That's what the ministry is there for. But the farmers must take responsibilities for their farms. They must use the expertise of the ministry. They must use the projects and programs of the state and make sure that they get their farms in order and to develop agriculture in Grenada. They cannot depend only and solely on the ministry. And we have seen some serious farmers working very hard. I have had the opportunity to visit several farms, Mr. Speaker, and I've seen the high level of production that is taking place with these farmers and the amount of monies that are going into their pockets. I was speaking to a farmer last week. I was so impressed with his presentation that I stopped to talk with him for about 20 minutes. We were talking. And he said to me, he said, you know, I am making so much money. I want to also applaud Ms. Teresa Marichaud because he's one of our farmers. He's one of the farmers that are under her program. And he was saying to me, he said, this has really, this new initiative that she has taken on, going around, getting the farmers organized. The ministry can do that. I'm happy to know that she's doing that, and several other persons will get involved in doing that. Because we have a number of hotels that are coming on stream, Mr. Speaker, and if we don't get serious, if we don't start producing the quality of things that the hotels are asking for, these are high-end hotels. They're going to want a nice slice of tomato on their plate. They're going to want the crispy lettuce that would crisp, and make them feel good. I feel good when I'm sitting at a restaurant and eating a meal, and the presentation is up to scratch and it tastes good. So, our farmers have to get more serious. The amount of money that farming, I could leave what I'm doing here because I ain't making no money here, and I don't know when we're going to get a raise. I could leave and go into farming, because when I pick up the check from a farmer to drop him and he open and he show me how much money he's making, I say, my goodness gracious. In 2 weeks, it's covering my salary. Well, I don't call it a salary, I call it a pittance. Because I could go into my private business, I could go into floral arrangement and many other things, the talent that the Lord has given me, and I would make more money in the twinkling of an eye. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to really tell our farmers that they have to really take agriculture serious. And I want to stop here, Mr. Speaker, by just thanking. I have 15 more minutes, huh? Yes. Thanking the persons who make a difference in agriculture. All the support we have had from the international agencies, from CARDI, from ICA, from the Grenada Nutmeg Association, GCNA, GCA, from the Republic of China, from IFAD, from Caribbean Development Bank, from the USDA, OECS, the Grenada Marketing and Importing Board, CDB, Mr. Speaker, CARICOM, CARBI, CAFSA, Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. These are the people that make a difference in our programs here in Grenada. And we have to thank them sincerely for the support that they have given us over the years and continue to give us that support, Mr. Speaker. I also want to recognize, Mr. Speaker, the companies who have taken that shift in developing the chocolate industry in Grenada. We have to commend them. Whenever I travel, our chocolates are watching me right in the face there and not looking at me. People talk about the taste and the quality. And we are looking to diversify. When I went to Ecuador, Mr. Speaker, I had Shadow Benny chocolate. I had passion fruit chocolate. So we have to explore these flavors. We have to start getting ourselves more unique and keep our chocolate flavors and keep our standards here in Grenada, because everybody wants to follow what we are doing here in Grenada. So, Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I want to take the opportunity to thank my staff. They are right here in full force. I see them here. I want to thank them. I look at ICA and CARDI, they look as part of, they are part of our staff, but they fit in so nicely there. I want to thank them all for all the support they have given us. Some of them have worked. I want to thank my new PS, who is taking shape in the ministry. He has all the, who has all the skills and all of that to shape this ministry. So we are working closely, and with the farmers, we want to make sure that the farmers grow and develop and the agriculture sector shine in 2020. Mr. Speaker, with this limited time, I want to shift to my constituency. They are here in full numbers. The time had changed to 7, and they are here. And I want to thank them for coming out. Look at them there. Look at them. They have supported me over the years, and they continue to support me, Mr. Speaker, in every sense of the word. If I just say in the morning, I get up 5 and I say, oh, Mr. Pierre, Mr. this, Mr. that, come and help me do that. You bet your bottom dollar they will be there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so I want to thank them for all the support they have given me over the years and continue to support. I want to thank my staff at the office in Grenville, Pastor, and the team. I can call Pastor anytime to ask him to do anything for me, and he will be there. All of them. The seed officer, the housing officer, all of them there, I'm grateful, and I thank them for the support. Mr. Speaker, I move into the constituency now quickly, and I would just inform you of the main projects. A lot of emphasis was placed on housing and roads, Mr. Speaker, and we also looked a lot at, about employment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will see the start of the construction of the water storage facility at Munich. The cost of the project is $600,000 with a capacity of 100,000 gallons. And it's starting on Monday, and it will be on for 4 months. And I know the Munich people would be smiling because they would not be out of water, and their water would be clean and, healthy, Mr. Speaker. So it's a plus for Munich with the facility that is going on, would start off on Monday, and I think the contractor is Kenny Forrester and his team. Mr. Speaker, we just saw the opening of the state-of-the-art school at Munich. The minister spoke about it. We intend to work with the ministry so that we could develop evening classes and other programs for the people of Munich and surrounding areas, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a new project that is going to be unfolding in St. James, and that is a tourism project. We all spoke about, and you heard the ministers, the MPs spoke about the tourism projects that would be in St. Andrews. We have a special one coming out in St. James, and it will be a waterfall. We have already spoken to all the parties involved, the owners of the lands, and we are now putting the MOD agreement together so that we can roll off this project, start off before the end of the year, Mr. Speaker. This would be a plus for the people of St. James because there's not much activity taking place. To bring a tourism project there of that magnitude and that quality would be a plus for the people in that area. Mr. Speaker, the people of Chiney Hill would get a recreational center. We will start the project before the end of the year. Mr. Speaker, we have had dialogue with the owners of the lands, and right now I believe we should have a team up in that area who would be putting the marks on the ground or looking at the area so that we can get the acquisition going for the land. So the people of Chiney Hill will be happy because there are so much children in Chiney Hill and they have no way to recreate. Mr. Speaker, in 2020 we'll focus our attention on transforming our community centers and to developmental centers. We don't want to just have these centers there and people just fitting and having a good time. We want to educate our people. We want to train and develop and bring new programs and projects to the community. So these people could be part of nation building. They could, help to develop this country. Because we have a lot of talent, sometimes when I speak to some of we say, our little people. I don't think they're little. With that big brain they have there and the things that come out of it, it's amazing that they can turn this country around. Mr. Speaker, so Harford Village, Ladig, and Union Community Centers will be developed next year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, small business development, we'll do a lot of work in that area because we realize that our people have to start doing other things instead of depending on government for a job. We need to build that area and ensure that we have persons independent. Mr. Speaker, a lot has been done. 51 persons received material during the year. We had 6 persons who were given grants. We have over 225 applications waiting to be selected for housing in St. Andrews Southwest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, street lighting, street lights and lighting up. We have had 3 street lights in Chiney Hill, Harford Village, and Pleasance, and we are lighting up. We have lit up the Palms and the Union Plain Center. We just put a proper management structure in place to ensure that it runs smoothly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must thank our environmental wardens. They did an excellent job. They are the ones that keep cleaning the area and clearing the drains so that we wouldn't have heavy floodings in the constituency, Mr. Speaker, and so we have, they have been working tirelessly to ensure that the place is kept clean and we are free of blockage of drains and overhangings. Mr. Speaker, we have supported a lot of children in education, over 20 persons at HGU, a number of children, 12 students receiving CXC exam fees. We have helped with persons who need water. We have helped with transportation, Mr. Speaker, and we have, I think, 215 households receive help from the voucher program, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Imani program is going fine. We have in our Empower program, we have over 22 young men who is involved in the Empower program, and they are doing a good job. Their lives are being shaped now. They're not hanging out and having their pants all below their bottom and all of that. This thing has to stop. It annoys me whenever I see that in the streets. And Mr. Speaker, I've spoken to them on many occasions that they have to shift their thinking and get themselves properly for work. Mr. Speaker, our brigades have been doing well. We have built over 10 houses and repaired as much. And we have done over 6 bathroom and toilets, Mr. Speaker, for elderly persons and needy persons, Mr. Speaker. We have also given material to some persons, needy persons, who just wanted some materials to fix their bath and toilet, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we did over 19 roads, pavements, and drains, and curb walls, etc., Mr. Speaker, in St. Andrews Southwest, Soubise, Canal Road, Rivulet Lane, Munich, the Mami, Richmond, St. Andrews, Mount St. Albans, Maitland Road, Canal Road, Granborough, Ford. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the areas. Bellevue Land, Soubise, to the tune of $211,851.43, Mr. Speaker. This we have done on roads and pavements, etc., in St. Andrews Southwest. We want to thank the Minister of Works. Some asphalt work was done in Tuileries, Union, Munich, to maintain the roads, and binders were done in some other areas, Mr. Speaker. Muddy gaps, Mr. Speaker, we have done quite a few muddy gaps because we realize that we have to continue to lift the self-esteem of our people, especially our young people who have nice jobs in the bank and all about now. We can't have them going with their muddy feet. So this is something we have really worked on to help them to enhance and look well and develop themselves. You know, you feel better when when these things happen in your life. You feel your spirit is being lifted, and you work more, you do more work, and you do it more efficiently, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so a lot has been done in St. Andrews Southwest, Mr. Speaker, and I want to commend, and we continue to do work in this area, because we believe that our people have a lot of talent, and we must develop our constituency and our people. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank them again. I want to thank these workers who are in front of me here. Not only workers, they are my soldiers as well. They support me in every sense of the word. And I want to thank them sincerely. They have been coming in this house over and over and over, and they are here today, bright and early this morning. So I want to thank them, and I want to wish them well, and I want to let them know I'm there for them, and I know they're there for me. So with these few words, I want to close off, and I want to also, Mr. Speaker, mention that there are 2 stalwarts that I really want to mention. I should have done it before. And it's Ramsey Rush. I really want to, these are men that have worked with the industry, the cocoa industry, the nutmeg industry, Mr. Speaker. Over the years, they have worked, and they have worked, selflessly. Ramsey Rush and Mr. Joseph, what's his name? Sam Joe. I mean, when you hear the name of Sam Joe and Ramsey Rush, their voices are the loudest in the cocoa meetings, especially Ramsey. But they have brought something to the industry. And they are not well now, Mr. Speaker, and I want to make mention of them here today. And remember them in our prayers, and remember the good things that they have done. We don't value our people enough. I'm saying that all the time. We need to value our people and the quality of work they have done to lift and develop this country, Mr. Speaker. I want to also thank my family. I want to thank my husband who sits right behind me. Is he present?
He has your back.
You see what I'm saying?
He has your back.
He has my back. He has always been there in every parliament that we have. He sits right behind me. I want to thank him for the support he has given me over the years. He says he doesn't see me. He said to me, he glances me every day from a distance. So I have to make up for that over the holidays, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank him. And I want to thank my children who call me all the time from overseas and they can never get me. And even when they travel here to see me, they see me once in a while. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, the sacrifices that we make as MPs, as ministers, you know, it's out of this world. But we want to make sure that our country moves in the right direction. And that's why we are there still. That's why we are there still. You know, some mornings when I get up, Mr. Speaker, I say, Lord, I'm feeling so tired. But then when I know I have a 7 o'clock meeting and an 8 o'clock meeting, we have these people from overseas who give us all the funding all the time. We have to be there. We have to make the effort to be there, Mr. Speaker. And then our night meetings with our constituency, we have to go to tell them what we're doing, and we have to go to support them and listen to their problems and their concerns. So, you know, we have it all wrong. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all the people who have supported me and all who continue, my colleagues who from time to time support me in different, they make certain interventions to help shape some of the things that we are doing. I want to thank them as well for the support. And I want to wish everyone all the best. I know we have another parliament, so I will leave the Christmas wishes for the next meeting, Mr. Speaker. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you all.
Thank you, Honourable Representative for St. Andrew Northwest.
And I'm on time.
Sorry, Southwest. My apologies. My apologies. And we have Parliamentary Representative for the Tongue of St. George.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first let me commend the Ministry of Finance, the workers, the PS, the Prime Minister, and Minister of Finance for a job well done, not only in the presentation of the budget, not only in the preparation of the budget, but also for the management of the finances of the country over the last year. I also want to commend all ministers of government who have been working hard over the last year to ensure that we fulfill the task, fulfill the mission, fulfill the programmatic platform that we have as a government in that year. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, work well done to all of us. Mr. Speaker, I'm here to present on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Labour. And in that regard, first of all, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Speaker, is there to maintain Grenada's foreign policy. And our foreign policy is hinged on our domestic policy. In other words, Mr. Speaker, everything that we do in foreign policy must be connected to our domestic policy, in tourism, in education, in agriculture, in all of the areas of domestic development. The foreign ministry and our foreign policy must be in sync. In addition to that, we must ensure that Grenada plays a role, as much as we can with our limited resources, a role in ensuring that international relations, that we play a positive part in international relations, that as much as possible we maintain the Caribbean region as a zone of peace, that we contribute in any way to climate resilience, and that we play our part as a small nation, as a small island developing state in the foreign, in the international arena, so that Grenada can be positive in that respect. Mr. Speaker, I will just go through some of the areas that permanent missions have been engaged in. We have several missions, embassies throughout the world, and I will give the Parliament and the country an overview of that. The first one, Mr. Speaker, is our permanent mission to the United Nations, and I must commend our ambassador there, our workers at the permanent mission in New York. They are manning a very difficult post with limited resources. As you're well aware, the United Nations, all of the nations in the world, independent countries are represented there. As such, we have a difficult task. And I want to say that Ambassador Maguire has done an excellent job. In fact, she was elected chair. At one point, she was the youngest of the ambassadors in New York. She's not anymore. I think somebody took that accolade recently. But she's been elected chair of what's called the Special Committee, the Committee of 24. It's a special committee on the situation with regard to the implementation of the Declaration of the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, commonly called C24. A very special committee that looks at decolonization and tries to ensure that all countries who have been colonized are decolonized. And that ranges from the places like Puerto Rico that we may not consider to be a colonial territory, but some of its peoples have been demanded independence, and several countries throughout the world. Some in the region, in the Virgin Islands, some of those countries, and we are now, through Ambassador Maguire, the chair of that committee. She is also the chair of SIDS-DOC Island Women Open Network, IWAN, a network which is intended to help build capacity of women to participate in the transformation of small island developing states' energy sector. And I must say here, Mr. Speaker, that our Prime Minister, Dr. Mitchell, continues to serve as the president of SIDS-DOC. So Grenada continues at the UN to play a very significant part, and I want to commend our ambassador in New York, our permanent representative at the UN, for work well done. We also have a mission, as you're well aware, Mr. Speaker, in Washington, D.C., and there we have Ambassador Yolan Smith, who is the chair, also elected chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, CD, during the period January to June 2019. Again, playing a very critical part in Washington, despite our size. We are batting, some people say, we are boxing, some people say, above our weight. Also chairing of the Permanent Council of the OAS from July 1st to November 30th, 2019. So at the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C., Grenada, through its embassy, is playing a critical role. And one of the major highlights of the stewardship, of the chairmanship, was the negotiation of a resolution in Washington, at the OAS, to convene a special session in March 2020 to elect the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General of the organization, and it was approved by consensus at its first formal presentation. And that was a significant achievement in Washington. And I must say that the Washington Mission also does some outreach to the community, because we have a substantial Grenada community in Washington, and while she is ambassador to the OAS, she is also ambassador to the United States, and therefore she is reaching out to the Grenadian community in Washington, D.C. We have a large community. In fact, even our own Prime Minister, Dr. Mitchell, lived in Washington, and he's well aware of the size and importance of the diaspora community in Washington, D.C. Then we have our embassy in Havana, and we have Ambassador Clarice Charles, who does an excellent job. I think the government recently awarded her, gave her an OB or CB, and I think we must continue to commend her. I visited Cuba, and she takes personal care of many of the students there. We have 63 students in Havana, and she has to ensure that everything is okay with them while continuing to negotiate for more. And she continues the solidarity and friendship with the government and people of Cuba. As everyone in the country is well aware, Cuba has played a significant part in our development assistance, and her role in Cuba and the embassy's role in Cuba has been significant. And the 63 students, if you go to any hospital in Grenada, well, you will know the contribution of the Cuban medical system and the Cuban training to our own development. She also does a lot for the health of the nation. During the last year, 19 private and 7 government-sponsored Grenadians arrived in Havana for medical care. Without Cuba, I don't know what some of our people who can't afford expensive care in some of the metropolitan countries would do. And Ambassador Clarice Charles, I am always amazed when Ambassador, Ambassador houses some of these patients in her own home. I don't know how she does it, how she has the ability to do it, but I want to commend her on behalf of all the Grenadians she has taken care of, on behalf of all of the people in Grenada for her excellent work. Caribbean people too, not just Grenadians, Ambassador, African people, as my friend said. She just has that way of wanting to be the mother and the caregiver for all of these people. And I want to especially commend Ambassador Charles. I know the government has already done that by giving her the award, but we want from the ministry and from the community thank her. She's also doing a thing where she's trying to map Cubans of Grenadian descent. I think she's found quite a bit of them in Cuba, and that is Grenadians who went to Cuba back in the 60s and the 50s for sugarcane. She's been mapping them and has embarked on a project to identify all of them. I think she's obtaining the necessary documents. Some of them have become Grenadian citizens, the descendants of these persons, and I want to commend her for that. The embassy has also documented almost 400 persons who've been studying in Cuba since 1979. A significant contribution to our development. 400 from a country who has been under a blockade since the early 1960s. Significant for Cuba. 400 persons in our country have been trained. I think we must always pay tribute to that. And look, we have Ambassador Modestia, who studied in Cuba, one of the first students to go to Cuba. And I think I want to really thank the government and people of Cuba on behalf of the government and people of Grenada for their contribution to our development and continuing contribution despite the pressures that have been brought on them over the years. So, we want to say to Ambassador, please convey to your government our deep gratitude. Moscow, we have another embassy in Moscow, Russia, and that is a fairly new embassy. And I visited earlier this year, and I must say that the relationship is developing and bearing substantial fruit. In scholarships, we have been offered many scholarships from Moscow. I visited some of the universities, and I must say that we need to ensure that our students take it up. And on that note, I want to make a point that there are many scholarships at the Ministry of Education. Some of our students do not want to take it up. I remember the early days of Cuba, and I've said that here before. When scholarships were offered to Cuba, many people didn't want to go, because many of the parents said, I remember one of the PSs, I think my dear friend, the PS in the Ministry of Education, said that even his grandmother didn't want him to go study. Why? Because there was all these rumors about what will happen, what FIDEL going to do you, they're going to send you to the sugarcane field and cut sugarcane. Rumors to stop people from going. Today, going to Cuba is normal as going to Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to say that for other countries, including Moscow, because when I visited Moscow, I saw students there who are doing very well. There's a police officer who is doing very well. You saw him on YouTube the other day. He's doing extremely well in Moscow. Please, one of the advantages, and I want to make this point here, if I can do so on behalf of the Ministry of Education, one of the advantages of studying in Cuba, studying in Moscow, studying in China, studying in Serbia, is that you get a second language. There is no better asset than to have a second language. I wish that I had a second language. I wish that my children and grandchildren can study in one of these countries so that they learn Chinese, they learn Serbian, they learn Russian, because that becomes an asset and makes you much more employable. So Russia has a lot of scholarships. Please take them up if you can. In trade, we've also done significant work with trade. We've had over 30 tons of cocoa beans have been delivered to Russia, because there's a company there called Mojo, and they're manufacturing chocolate. I have the chocolate. In fact, I have some in my refrigerator. Chocolate made in Cuba, which is made of beans from Grenada. Over 30 tons of cocoa has been shipped to Moscow through the work of our embassy. And I want to congratulate our ambassador in Moscow for work well done with regard to developing the trade relations between our two countries. So there we go with the importance of these embassies. Westerhall Rums. Westerhall Rums has signed an agreement for distribution of rum in Russia. and over 1,500 bottles have been delivered to Russia. 1,500 bottles of Grenadian rum. It tells us that there is a market over there, and that is why our embassies are being used as commercial outposts to see if we can work to get our products into these countries. Again, and there are other products. The Minister of Agriculture spoke about all of these. Yeah, the minister said, obviously the rum tastes good. Well, I haven't tasted it, Minister, but if you say so. The point is that we need to get our products into these markets, and the Russian embassy, our embassy in Moscow, is doing much in that. In healthcare, there's been delivery of over $200,000 worth of neonatal equipment to Grenada's pediatric department, work done by former Foreign Affairs Minister and Minister of Health, and this provides an opportunity through a memorandum that was signed with the government of Russia to build a pediatric oncology center in Grenada, something we're working on and something we hope can lead to enhancement of healthcare in Grenada. And again, I want to commend our embassy in Russia for that work. China, as you know, is one of our reliable allies. China has been doing a lot, and I want to commend the government and people of China for their continued support. The Chinese, our embassy in Beijing has done a substantial amount of work over the years to ensure that Grenada's investment in Grenada is promoted. In fact, many of the investments that are currently underway in Grenada has been as a result of two things. One, the embassy in Moscow, they're working to promote Grenada embassy in Beijing, working to promote Grenada in Beijing, but also the fact that many Chinese have become Grenadian citizens through CBI. And as a result of that, seeing Grenada, seeing the investment climate, seeing the investment opportunities, seeing what is possible, they have decided to come to Grenada not only as citizens, but to invest. So our China connection, our China embassy, our China relations has led to substantial investments, but also has led to substantial amount of bilateral cooperation. For example, we recently negotiated 100 million RMB, which is 38 million US dollars for the refurbishment of the athletic stadium, but also to include other infrastructural projects. This is only in the last couple of months. In addition to that, hundreds of Grenadians continue to travel to China on training, either on short-term or long-term training, long-term scholarships to Beijing, and many of them come back better able, better equipped in order to assist in national development. And that is what I have said and continue to say about our relations with these countries, with Moscow, with Cuba, with China, where we get training opportunities. They are assisting us not to become continually dependent, but to become independent. When our engineers, our doctors, our personnel are trained in these countries, they come back to Grenada to participate in development, and eventually we become a more independent country. In Japan, we have signed a technical cooperation agreement with Japan in the amount of 1.8 million to be used by the Ministry of Fisheries. And I know my dear brother W here is quite happy with that, because now the Ministry of Fisheries will be able to purchase equipment for the enhancement of the fisheries sector. And that, again, is through the cooperation with the government and people of Japan. Morocco, another reliable friend. We have, well, first of all, we've established a new embassy, not Grenada, but the OECS has established an embassy in Rabat, the capital of Morocco, in order to enhance the relationship between the OECS and Morocco. While we do not have somebody there, on a recent visit in the last month, Morocco has indicated to us that there is an opening for a Grenadian to be placed in the embassy. Right now, I think there's a Kadishan, there's a St. Lucia, and a Grenadian will be added to the staff to ensure that our interest is also sought and achieved in Morocco. Recently, in the last month, we signed a new roadmap agreement where we got $500,000 US every year over the next 3 years. We also have agriculture with our farmers, and I think the Minister of Agriculture will agree with this. Our farmers are quite pleased with a Moroccan fertilizer. We are going to get 180 tons of fertilizer every year for the next 3 years. We are going to receive all kinds of training in the agricultural sector for Morocco. Again, soil fertility testing. It is one of the things that we have to look at. I have said over the years that yes, we have traditional products in agriculture, but everywhere I go in my visits to India, to Morocco, to all these countries that look at agriculture, can we test our soil to see if there's any other products of high value that we can do in Grenada? I always say that when I visited Brazil many years ago, Brazil was not, soybeans was not indigenous to Brazil, but they tested the soil, soybeans